When I first moved to Haverhill Park Estates, I had no idea the biggest threat to my holiday spirit would come from a single neighbor. My name is Lucas Whitaker. I'm a designer at a local marketing firm, and every December, I go all out with Christmas decorations. It's been my beloved tradition since childhood: elaborate lights, reindeer figurines, and an 8-foot-tall inflatable Santa perched on the front lawn. Some call it over the top, but for me, it's a heartfelt homage to the joys of the season. I initially found Haverhill Park Estates appealing for its neat lawns, tree-lined streets, and a modest HOA that mostly took care of landscaping. The houses were spaced nicely, enough for privacy, but close enough for neighborly hellos. During the rest of the year, I was a quiet occupant with minimal fuss. But come December, I'd transform my home into a dazzling spectacle of lights synchronized to holiday music. The neighborhood kids adored it. Their parents would slow their cars to take in the show. I even set out a donation box for a local children's charity. Over the years, we raised a decent sum. It never occurred to me that someone would object so vehemently. Sure, every place has a Scrooge or two, but I'd always try to end my light shows by 10 p.m., keep the volume reasonable, and ensure the cables were tidy and safe. I believed I was respectful of neighbors' rest. That notion shattered when I met Madeline Ainsley, the HOA's self-styled enforcer, widely nicknamed Karen. She was a woman in her early 50s, meticulously dressed in neutral suits, with permanently pursed lips and a pinched expression that screamed disapproval. I first encountered Karen about 3 weeks before Christmas that year. She showed up on my doorstep with a thick binder of HOA guidelines, zeroing in on excessive holiday displays. She kept her voice flat and haughty, explaining that large-scale decorations can affect property values. She threw in a sneer, hinting that I should tone it down. Polite as I tried to be, I sensed her barely contained rage at the notion of glowing reindeer and blinking lights next door. I didn't think it would escalate beyond mild scolding. In previous neighborhoods, the worst complaint I'd received was from a neighbor who disliked the inflatable Santa's fan noise. But Karen was different. She exuded a sense of absolute authority. Little did I suspect that beneath her condescending posture lay a willingness to commit outright sabotage. For a while, Karen's meddling remained limited to scowls and pointed remarks. She'd pass by my yard when I was setting up the lights, arms folded, scanning each figurine. One Saturday, she told me to remove the gingerbread archway from my driveway because it infringed on the recommended color palette. I responded politely that no such rule existed. Her mouth twitched, as though I'd personally insulted her. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended at Karen's insistence, she spent half an hour bemoaning light pollution from holiday decorations. She used exaggerated phrases like a disco ball assault on our retinas, claiming I was single-handedly turning Haverhill Park into a tacky amusement park. Most of the board members eyed her with skepticism. After all, it was the holiday season, and many families enjoyed the festive atmosphere. Ultimately, they concluded her complaint was a personal preference, not an official violation. Karen left the meeting in a huff. One older board member, Ms. Patel, approached me and whispered, "Don't let her bully you. She's been poking at everyone's business since she moved in last summer." It was reassuring to know that not everyone sided with Karen's heavy-handed approach. Still, tension simmered. In early December, when I completed my final touches, strings of LED icicles, red and green projectors, and a mechanical elf that popped out of a chimney, Karen's glare grew colder. A few neighbors teased me that she might escalate further. I laughed it off, figuring the worst she'd do was file petty HOA infractions or call the city about noise. I had no clue how far she'd go. Meanwhile, the rest of Haverhill Park was gearing up for the holidays. Wreaths appeared on front doors, children hung garlands, and a sense of festive cheer pervaded the sidewalks. The local weatherman predicted an unusually cold December. Temperatures dropped into the low teens, with a threat of icy conditions. I felt a surge of excitement. There's nothing like holiday lights reflecting on a snowy lawn to complete the Christmas magic. Yet soon, that winter wonderland would plunge into literal darkness, courtesy of a certain resentful HOA tyrant. Just days before Christmas, I woke to a commotion outside my bedroom window. Looking out, I saw Karen on the sidewalk, gesturing wildly at 2 men in uniforms from the local power company. Though I couldn't hear the exchange, it was clear she was demanding something. pointing at the utility pole that served my side of the street. One of the workers shook his head, appearing to refuse. Karen threw up her hands, furious. I decided to step out and investigate. By the time I arrived, the crew was already climbing back into their truck. Karen snapped at me. "The power lines to your gaudy display are an eyesore." I asked them to see if there was a code violation. When I asked the workers what was going on, they politely explained they found no illegal tapping or issues. My Christmas lights were plugged into normal outlets, well within capacity. Karen huffed, stomped her foot, and stormed off. It was my first real sign that she was trying to manipulate even the local utility workers to shut me down. I shrugged it off. My brother, ironically, was the director of operations at the state's power grid authority. He oversaw large-scale distribution across multiple counties. He didn't deal with local lines day to day, but he was certainly knowledgeable. If there was a real problem with my electricity usage, he'd be the first to say something. But I doubted we'd ever need his help. That notion changed abruptly. That afternoon, neighbors told me they'd seen Karen collecting signatures for a petition to limit holiday lighting hours. Most refused to sign. A retired Marine across the street even said, "My grandkids love the lights." No way. With each rejection, Karen's frustration likely grew. She glowered at me from her yard, arms folded, as though I were single-handedly undermining her personal crusade. I tried to maintain a friendly veneer. We were neighbors, after all, but the unease in my gut grew daily. A friend reminded me, "Don't forget you can always call your brother if she tries something crazy." I chuckled. I doubt it'll come to that. She's just an HOA busybody. I had no clue how wrong I was. On December 22nd, just 3 days before Christmas, a powerful cold front descended on our region. Overnight temps sank near zero, and the weatherman predicted a harsh freeze. Families hunkered down, ensuring their heaters functioned, their faucets dripped to prevent pipe bursts, and their pets stayed indoors. I made sure my outdoor cables were shielded, leaving the synchronized light show set to a shorter schedule to help conserve some energy. That evening, I had a group of friends over for a small holiday gathering. We sipped hot cocoa, laughed by the fireplace, and occasionally peeked outside to admire the twinkling lights. Around 9 p.m., though, the entire house flickered. Suddenly, everything went dark. My living room lamps, the heaters hum, and, of course, the glowing reindeer in the yard. We collectively gasped. A power outage in freezing weather can be dangerous. My mind raced with possible causes. A down line from ice, a transformer blown. But the sky was clear. Then I remembered Karen's obsession. Could she somehow have orchestrated this? I stepped onto my porch, joining neighbors who emerged onto the street. Every house, as far as I could see, was dark. No porch lights, no street lamps, no sign of electricity. People's breath condensed in the frosty air, and some folks called out, "Anybody know what happened?" Others cursed the terrible timing in sub-zero cold. One neighbor had a battery-operated radio. A short broadcast from the local news station mentioned a widespread outage in our entire suburb. They said the local utility was investigating, but no cause was confirmed yet. My heart pounded. Could Karen have done something truly insane, like cutting the main feed? Within the hour, our phones began dying or losing signal as local towers experienced backup battery drains. The cold intensified. We realized we might face a lengthy night without heat. Elderly residents worried about hypothermia. Families with infants scrambled to find warm blankets. For me, an alarm bell rang. This was beyond a typical outage. If Karen had a hand in it, we were facing sabotage on a scale I couldn't have imagined. We huddled as a neighborhood, forming a makeshift crisis plan. Some with wood-burning fireplaces offered to shelter those without alternative heat. The local roads iced over, making it risky to drive far for a hotel. Meanwhile, the temperature outside plummeted, dropping below zero as the night wore on. I kept my Christmas guests fed with leftover soup, illuminated by candlelight and flashlights. Word spread that Karen was seen earlier near the main substation. A neighbor who'd driven home from a holiday party glimpsed her car parked near a restricted area next to the power lines. He found it odd, but didn't think much of it until now. My stomach sank. Did she actually sabotage the substation or tamper with high-voltage equipment, all to cut power for my Christmas lights? It sounded so extreme. Yet Karen's mania about excess electricity usage might have led her to rationalize something so reckless. If this was sabotage, The consequences were severe, an entire suburb in the dark, in dangerous cold. Some neighbors panicked, rummaging for portable generators or battery packs. Others cursed Karen's name in hushed tones, though we had no direct proof. This was more than an HOA squabble. This was a potential crime impacting thousands. I tried calling the utilities emergency line, but got a busy signal. My phone's battery dipped dangerously low. Then I recalled my brother, Daniel, who oversaw the state power grid. If anyone could expedite an investigation or confirm the cause, it would be him. I rummaged for my phone's charger, cursing the lack of power. Then I remembered my car. I dashed outside in the frigid air, hooking my phone to the car charger and cranking the engine for warmth. Within minutes, I had just enough battery to place a call. Daniel picked up groggily. He'd likely been asleep. "Hey, Luke, everything okay?" I told him about the total blackout in my suburb, the rumors of sabotage, the suspicious neighbor. Daniel's tone sharpened. "That's serious. Let me check the state monitoring system and see if there's a known fault or an unusual shutdown." He promised to call back as soon as he had intel. So, I waited in my car, hugging myself against the cold. Around me, the entire street was black as pitch, except for occasional flickers of candlelight in windows. The temperature was brutal, and the wind whipped snow across the pavement. I pictured older folks, or small children, trembling under blankets. Karen's vendetta, if indeed she was behind this, reached new heights of cruelty. Daniel called back about half an hour later. "Luke, our system shows an abrupt manual disconnection at the local substation, as if someone physically flipped the cutoff. That's not normal or authorized. The local utility staff can't even get in. They said the gate is padlocked from the inside." My jaw dropped. That substation was typically protected with chain-link fences and locked gates. If Karen had forcibly entered or found a key, she'd broken serious laws. Daniel continued, "We're dispatching a repair crew, but the roads are icy, and it might take hours. We've alerted state police, too, because this looks like intentional sabotage. Are you folks safe?" I glanced at my darkened house, a swirl of worry in my chest. "We're coping. It's sub-zero, though. People might not handle this for long." Daniel assured me the Power Grid Authority would prioritize restoring electricity. "Hang tight. The cops will want statements about that neighbor if she's suspected." When I relayed this to neighbors, a wave of shock and anger rippled. Karen had apparently gone to insane lengths, not just pulling a local fuse, but shutting down the entire substation that served thousands of homes in our suburban region, not just Haverhill Park. On Christmas week, in a record-breaking freeze, the scope of her sabotage was staggering. We decided to check on the most vulnerable residents. Groups of neighbors trudged door to door through swirling snow, ensuring elderly or disabled folks had enough blankets or could move to a warmer house. My friend Manny possessed a small generator, which he used to power a space heater in Ms. Delgado's home. She was 90 and bedridden. Meanwhile, families with toddlers bunked with neighbors who had backup fireplaces. A local veterinarian offered to shelter pets in a well-insulated building he owned. The community spirit was strong, but the rage at Karen's monstrous act simmered just beneath. Despite the crisis, no one had actually seen Karen since the lights went out. Some suspected she'd fled or was hiding in her house. Others said the substation was only a short drive from her place. Maybe she was still out there. As the night dragged on, we clung to the hope that the state police or the power crew would arrive soon. The entire region, not just our immediate neighborhood, was in dire straits. Around 3 a.m., I heard sirens in the distance. Blue and red lights flickered off the icy streets as a convoy of police SUVs approached. They parked near the entrance to our subdivision, and uniformed officers fanned out. A tall officer in a heavy winter coat approached me. Some neighbors had pointed him my way, since I'd been in contact with the power grid. His name was Lieutenant Vargas. Lieutenant Vargas asked for a quick summary. I told him of Karen's obsessive feud over my Christmas lights, her attempt to involve the local utility, and the neighbor who saw her near the substation gate. He nodded gravely. "We suspect it's the same substation sabotage. A crew found the main switch forcibly shut off, locks destroyed or replaced with a private padlock. We'll search for her." Another neighbor chimed in. "She's likely at her house. She's the only one insane enough to do this." The officer signaled to his team, who proceeded to Karen's address. The rest of us waited tensely, shining flashlights on the ice sidewalk. Meanwhile, a separate group of utility workers arrived, heading to the substation. Lieutenant Vargas told me they'd do everything possible to restore power quickly, but the equipment might need inspection to ensure no permanent damage was done. Half an hour later, an officer returned, shaking his head. Karen's house was dark. She wasn't answering the door, and there was no sign of her inside, at least from the windows. The garage was empty. She'd presumably fled. A wave of frustration swept us. She left thousands of people in the cold, potentially risking lives, and then vanished. At least the utility crew was on site now, and they'd gotten the substation's gate open. Good news. The sabotage was fixable with minimal repairs. The power might be back before dawn if all went smoothly. Lieutenant Vargas assured me that a warrant would be issued for Karen's arrest. He asked if I could confirm details or supply any evidence, such as footage of her near the substation. Unfortunately, I had none, but multiple neighbors witnessed suspicious behavior, so the case was strong. My limbs felt numb from the cold and exhaustion. Yet a flicker of relief burned in me. We'd likely have heat soon. Karen, however, had gone from a petty nuisance to a wanted criminal. This was bigger than me or Christmas lights now. She'd attacked an entire community's lifeline in frigid conditions. The mere thought of it made my head spin. By 5 a.m., the repair crew managed to restore power to our suburb. One by one, house lights blinked on, furnaces rumbled to life, and street lamps flickered in the pre-dawn darkness. A triumphant cheer rose from residents who'd endured hours of freezing gloom. I rushed into my house, verifying the heater kicked in. In minutes, precious warmth spread through the vents, and we exhaled relief. Yet the ordeal left scars. Some neighbors discovered burst pipes, floors flooded with icy water. Others lost entire refrigerators of perishable food. Ms. Delgado, the 90-year-old, had to be taken to the hospital for precautionary care. Her breathing was compromised by the cold. Families spent the rest of the morning cleaning up, salvaging holiday plans, and venting about Karen's vile act. As soon as my phone recharged, I had a text from Daniel. We see the substations back online. The sabotage might have shorted a few circuits, but the crew replaced them. The state police are coordinating with us. She's on the run, I guess. Hang in there. I marveled at how my brother's position gave him a vantage point on this madness. Normally, local outages don't cross his desk, but this sabotage was so brazen it demanded statewide attention. Despite the respite of having electricity restored, the day's mood remained tense. The news caught wind of the sabotage. Reporters camped near the substation, clamoring for interviews with residents. They labeled it the Haverhill Park power outage, speculating about an unknown culprit. Some neighbors came forward, naming Karen as the prime suspect. Her name soon circulated in the press, stirring public outrage. People were aghast that any individual would weaponize a substation over holiday lights. Meanwhile, the temperature outside lingered below freezing. My Christmas display, ironically, relit with the power's return, felt overshadowed by the damage done. Instead of awe, passers-by saw the lights as a symbol of the feud that left them shivering all night. Part of me considered shutting the display off to avoid further drama. But a friend insisted, don't let her sabotage your spirit. If anything, shine brighter to show she can't break us. The next evening, local police came door to door, collecting statements about the outage and Karen's hostility leading up to it. I recounted everything: her attempts to shut down my display, the local utility fiasco, the substation sabotage rumor. They thanked me, noting that a judge had issued an arrest warrant for felony vandalism, endangerment, and unauthorized tampering with critical infrastructure. No one had seen Karen since, though. Some suspected she left town. Others joked she'd joined the Grinch on Mount Crumpet. The irony was that by vanishing, she only fueled more condemnation. Even folks who'd previously thought she was just a strict neighbor now realized how unhinged her actions were. In a heartbreaking turn, we learned Ms. Delgado's condition worsened. Doctors said the cold might have exacerbated her respiratory issues. She was stable but required a longer hospital stay. That, more than anything, hammered home the severity of Karen's sabotage. This wasn't a mere annoyance. Lives were at stake in freezing temperatures without power. Public backlash was swift. The local news featured outraged commentary, urging the authorities to find Karen. On social media, #HOA Karen became a trending tag, with people condemning her destructiveness. Some armchair detectives tried to track her down, circulating supposed sightings. It all felt surreal, like a bizarre holiday special gone wrong. Amid the turmoil, I tried to keep the community spirit alive. I donated part of my Christmas display donations to help neighbors with burst pipes or medical bills. Others pitched in. We organized a small Rebuild Cheer fundraiser, selling hot cocoa and cookies to raise more funds for families impacted by the blackout. The sense of unity soared, ironically strengthened by Karen's misdeed. Still, the question lingered. Where was she? Would the police catch her before she struck again? At night, I double-checked my doors and windows, half expecting her to appear with wire cutters or some other sabotage tool. I prayed the fiasco was over. But as Christmas Day loomed, the tension overshadowed the holiday excitement. We needed closure and justice. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, snow dusted the rooftops in Haverhill Park. Families scurried with last-minute shopping, children's eyes gleaming with anticipation. The power fiasco still left deep scars, but folks tried to salvage holiday cheer. My brother Daniel called, wishing me a Merry Christmas, expressing relief the power was stable. He mentioned that the state police suspect Karen fled to a relative's house in a neighboring county. There was hope she'd be apprehended soon. That afternoon, I decided to do something bold. I turned my Christmas lights back on in full glory. Some neighbors gasped. Weren't we worried about enraging Karen further? But I explained, her sabotage didn't just target me, it targeted all of us. If we cower, she wins. So at dusk, my house lit up in a kaleidoscopic display, accompanied by gentle holiday tunes on a low-volume radio frequency. Children gathered with wonder, parents snapped photos. A few older neighbors thanked me for reminding them that one rogue person couldn't extinguish the joy of the season. Around 7 p.m., just as we were about to settle in for a quiet evening, a police cruiser pulled up. Inside were two officers and, to my astonishment, Karen, handcuffed in the back seat, looking disheveled, her eyes wide with panic. They'd apprehended her in a grocery store parking lot after a tip-off. The officer stepped out, saying they needed me to identify her and confirm her prior threats. I approached the window, my heart pounding. Karen's gaze met mine with a mixture of rage and desperation. You destroyed everything, she spat through the glass. You and your stupid lights. The officer commanded her to be quiet. She turned away, seething. A swirl of relief and sadness washed over me. As awful as her actions were, seeing a neighbor in that state was sobering. The officers explained she'd be booked for the sabotage, facing multiple felony charges. They had enough evidence from the substation tampering and eyewitnesses. She'd likely remain in custody through the holidays. Ms. Delgado's health scare might add to the charges, given the endangerment. My role, they said, was to confirm my sworn statement. I nodded, though I felt a pang of sorrow that it had come to this. The police drove off, their taillights disappearing into the snowy night, taking Karen to jail. A hush fell over the block. Word spread quickly. Neighbors peered out from windows or stepped onto porches, quietly relieved. Some raised mugs of cocoa in a half-cheer. The boogeyman who doused us in darkness was finally caught. Perhaps now, the community could truly find peace, celebrate the holiday without fear. Christmas Eve continued with a new sense of relief. Families resumed small gatherings. Children hung stockings with extra glee, and I fielded texts from those wanting updates on the Karen fiasco. The local news broadcasted that the alleged saboteur was in custody, crediting vigilant neighbors and the quick response by authorities. My phone buzzed constantly. Friends from across the state had heard the story of the HOA Karen who cut power over Christmas lights. The next morning, Christmas Day dawned bright and cold. Fresh snow blanketed the neighborhood. The smell of pine and chimney smoke filled the air. People woke to gifts under the tree, a sense of renewal. I stepped outside to see kids squealing as they tried out new sleds. An elderly couple next door waved, wishing me Merry Christmas and thanks for standing your ground. Ms. Delgado, I heard, was stable enough to speak to her family by phone, though she remained in the hospital. I sent a card and a small donation from the neighborhood fund. Mid-morning, the news confirmed that Karen was officially charged. Bail was set sky-high, reflecting the severity of sabotage to critical infrastructure. She'd spend the holidays in jail. Some neighbors worried about the rest of the HOA stuff. Would we need new leadership, or had she even been a board member? Actually, The HOA president clarified that Karen was never president or anything. She just acted as if she ran the association. The board disavowed her actions, promising no further fiascos. Even though the day was overshadowed by the drama, a sense of joy lingered. Freed from the threat of sabotage, families turned up their holiday music, lit their fireplaces, and enjoyed a truly special time. I, for one, felt immense gratitude. My brother's position had helped expedite the official response from the power grid, but ultimately, it was the community's unity that carried us through the freeze. People had shared resources, comforted each other, and refused to let Karen's hatred overshadow Christmas. That evening, after the flurry of gift exchanges and a hearty dinner with my loved ones, I sat on my couch, reflecting. My yard still glowed with lights. The reindeer shimmered in the snow. A gentle peace settled over me. Karen's meltdown had threatened to ruin everything, but in the end, it only brought us closer together. We'd found resilience in the darkest hours, literally and figuratively. In the days following Christmas, the story of Karen's sabotage spread beyond our suburb. Regional news stations covered the bizarre case of an HOA member cutting power during a record cold snap, outraging viewers who empathized with families huddling in the dark on a frigid night. Some talk shows debated HOA tyranny, citing Karen as the extreme example. Social media lit up with memes of Karen as the Grinch who stole Christmas lights. Meanwhile, an outpouring of sympathy arrived for Ms. Delgado, who slowly recovered. A local group arranged meal deliveries for her return home. The neighbors pitched in repairs for those with pipe damage. Even though the sabotage was traumatic, it fostered a wave of generosity, a silver lining to the chaos. I spent time cleaning up my yard after the holiday frenzy, but I left the lights up a bit longer, partly as a statement that we wouldn't be bullied. My brother Daniel visited, curious to see the aftermath. Walking the snowy sidewalk, he marveled at how close we'd come to disaster. Cutting an entire substation feed. She could have caused severe equipment damage or fires, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. At an impromptu neighborhood gathering, we toasted to better times. The conversation inevitably circled back to Karen's impending court case. The police had found evidence at her home linking her to the substation's locks, plus texts complaining about my monstrous holiday display. She'd bragged to someone about finding a way to teach them all a lesson. The text alone indicated premeditation. The weight of evidence suggested a lengthy sentence if convicted. I felt a pang of pity. She'd thrown away her future, all because of a vendetta against festive lights. But pity was tempered by outrage. So many had suffered. Ms. Delgado could have died in the freeze, and countless families endured a dreadful night. So I accepted that justice must run its course. Any illusions of maybe she just messed up once vanished under the mountain of evidence. January arrived with a renewed sense of calm. The battered lines at the substation were fully inspected and declared stable. The local power utility improved its security. Extra cameras, better locks, no more quick sabotage attempts. People in Haverhill Park exhaled relief, thankful they no longer feared a repeat of Karen's fiasco. The weather warmed slightly, easing the worst of the freeze. Meanwhile, the legal process churned forward. Karen's arraignment came up. She faced multiple felony charges, endangering public safety, vandalizing critical infrastructure, and more. The local district attorney, speaking to news cameras, called it one of the most reckless acts we've seen, given the frigid conditions. Karen's attorney tried to argue temporary insanity from holiday stress, but the public had little sympathy. On a personal note, I resumed normal life, cleaning up the Christmas decor, returning to my routine at the marketing firm, and meeting with neighbors to finalize the leftover community fund for pipe repairs. The ordeal remained a conversation topic, but we tried to move on. No one wanted to dwell endlessly on negativity. Still, the question of an appropriate sentence loomed. The prosecutor sought a strong deterrent, pointing out how close we'd come to widespread catastrophe. People speculated, maybe 5 years in prison, maybe more, especially if Ms. Delgado's family pressed additional charges. The rumor mill swirled, but we all agreed that no matter the outcome, Karen had lost her reputation, her standing, and possibly her freedom. One chilly evening, I sat in my living room, chatting with Daniel over video call. He joked, "You realize I never expected my power grid position to come in handy in your suburban spat." I laughed. Me neither. But I'm beyond grateful your inside scoop helped us confirm the sabotage. We might have been in the dark for days otherwise. He nodded seriously. It's a reminder that people can be as dangerous as any natural disaster. We raised mugs of tea across the digital connection, grateful that the holiday from hell was behind us. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. What if Karen hadn't been caught? But I dismissed it. We were safe. The new year beckoned with hope. By late January, Karen remained behind bars, awaiting her trial. The local news occasionally updated the public, detailing each new piece of evidence. Meanwhile, Haverhill Park Estates effectively disowned her. The HOA leadership clarified that her membership was revoked, and they apologized for not intervening sooner when her hostility surfaced. Some neighbors wanted to rename the HOA Guidelines Manual in her honor, but that was mostly dark humor. Life settled into a comfortable lull. With the holiday season behind us, people replaced Christmas lights with everyday porch lamps. Ms. Delgado returned from the hospital, greeted by a chorus of neighbors who decked her home in welcome back signs. She teared up, repeating, "Thank you. You saved me," referring to the outpouring of help during the blackout. The entire community felt proud of how we'd rallied. Karen's sabotage ironically unified us. One mild Saturday morning, I was clearing leftover pine needles from my yard when a local TV reporter approached, requesting an interview. She asked about the night of the blackout, how we coped, and my connection to the State Power Authority via my brother. I obliged, emphasizing the shared resilience. The segment aired that evening, painting a hopeful narrative, from chaos to solidarity, with Karen cast as a cautionary villain. That same day, a neighbor informed me the district attorney was building a strong case, backed by witness testimony, security footage near the substation, showing Karen's car license plate, and phone records indicating she planned the sabotage. They're not letting her off easy, the neighbor said. If convicted, she's looking at multiple felony counts. Hearing that gave me mixed emotions. I wanted accountability, but seeing someone's life collapse so completely was sobering. Ultimately, though, we had nearly lost a neighbor to the cold, and thousands endured a freezing, dangerous night. Sometimes, consequences must match the severity of the crime. February brought Karen's trial. Media vans clustered outside the county courthouse, eager for sensational coverage. The prosecution laid out the evidence. Her repeated attempts to shut down my Christmas lights, her confrontation with utility workers, the eyewitness who saw her at the substation, and the phone records. They even produced bolt cutters and padlocks found in her garage, matching the brand used at the substation. Karen's defense tried claiming she only intended to disable one line to my house, but inadvertently caused a bigger outage. That argument collapsed under the substation logs, which showed she forcibly pulled the main breaker, plunging thousands into darkness. She took the stand briefly, tearfully claiming she'd been driven insane by my obnoxious display, but the jury seemed unimpressed. The meltdown lacked remorse. It was more about justifying her actions. On the third day, Ms. Delgado's family testified about her harrowing ordeal, describing how close she came to hypothermia. The jury visibly stiffened. This wasn't a harmless prank. Someone nearly died. By day's end, it took them only a few hours of deliberation to return a verdict, guilty on multiple counts, including felony sabotage of critical infrastructure and reckless endangerment. Karen stood in a daze as the judge read the verdict. Her shoulders sagged, tears finally flowing. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a later date, but it was clear she faced potential years behind bars. The local news carried the story that evening. HOA member found guilty of holiday sabotage. The segment featured interviews from neighbors, some expressing relief, others lamenting how petty grievances escalated into tragedy. I quietly watched the broadcast at home, sipping tea, feeling a measure of closure. In early spring, Karen's sentencing arrived. I attended the hearing alongside a handful of neighbors. Ms. Delgado, now in better health, gave a brief statement, urging the judge to consider how vulnerable people could have died. The judge sternly addressed Karen, denouncing her act as callous and dangerously disproportionate to any complaint about holiday decorations. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Karen to 5 years in prison, with possible parole after 3, plus substantial restitution to affected families and the power utility. She was also ordered to complete a psychiatric evaluation. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Some found the punishment harsh, others felt it appropriate. Karen wept openly, but the damage was done. Leaving the courthouse, Ms. Delgado's son told me, "At least we have justice. Hopefully she never tries something like this again." The press hovered, but most of us declined further interviews. We'd had enough drama. Our main focus was moving on, healing from the upheaval. Back in Haverhill Park, a calm settled over the neighborhood. The threat of sabotage was gone. People no longer eyed the power lines with dread. The HOA introduced a new rule that large holiday displays should be discussed in friendly terms, not regulated with an iron fist. We joked that if anyone disliked our lights, they could simply talk it out over hot cocoa, not cut the entire grid. For me, it was a relief to put the fiasco behind us. My holiday spirit had been tested, but not broken. The memory of that freezing, powerless night lingered as a reminder that we should never take basic utilities or neighborly kindness for granted. Months flowed by, and the seasons changed. The overshadowing memory of Karen's sabotage faded, replaced by everyday life. Summertime in Haverhill Park Estates was pleasant: green lawns, barbecues, kids playing in sprinklers. Ms. Delgado fully recovered, occasionally hosting small backyard gatherings. Our sense of community thrived, ironically strengthened by the adversity we overcame together. Whenever out-of-town friends asked, "Aren't you afraid of doing big decorations again after the fiasco?" I'd grin. Not really. The odds of another Karen meltdown are pretty low. And if it ever happens, we know how to band together. They'd laugh, but they could see the sincerity. We'd learned crucial lessons about vigilance, mutual support, and the dangers of letting petty disputes escalate. The local power utility also upgraded security measures across all substations, installing advanced surveillance to prevent sabotage. My brother Daniel said it was a silver lining. Karen's crimes spotlighted vulnerabilities that needed fixing. The entire state grid was safer now. Occasionally, neighbors would mention the meltdown at Christmas with a shudder, but we tried not to dwell on negativity. Instead, the focus turned toward building stronger neighborly bonds, ensuring no one felt isolated or at odds. The new HOA leadership was friendlier, too. They launched community events, like a fall festival, where we donated baked goods to local charities. Everyone pitched in, reminding us that the real spirit of community overshadowed one person's malicious act. When December rolled around again, I hesitated before lugging out my trademark Christmas decorations. Part of me worried. Would it stir painful memories? Then neighbors started asking, "Lucas, we hope you'll do the lights again." "It's tradition," Ms. Delgado's daughter insisted. "Please, it brightens our street." Moved by their support, I decided to decorate, though perhaps a bit more modestly. Not out of fear, but out of respect for those who might still harbor uneasy memories. Yet the moment I plugged in the first string of lights, a wave of excitement coursed through me. Christmas had always been about warmth, joy, and generosity, letting the memory of sabotage overshadow that felt wrong. So, I compromised. A slightly scaled-down display, no less festive, but a bit simpler. The result was still dazzling, with Santa, reindeer, and a musical sequence, albeit quieter than before. Neighbors cheered on the first night it lit up. Children squealed with delight. My heart soared. Throughout that Advent season, not a single complaint was lodged. The new HOA guidelines about holiday decorations simply stated a time frame and courtesy hours, which I followed. People strolled by, smiling, taking photos. A year after Karen's destructive act, the neighborhood glowed with resilience. That first night, Ms. Delgado herself came by in a wheelchair, accompanied by her son, to watch the lights. She whispered, "Thank you for not letting her bitterness ruin this for us." I felt tears prick my eyes, grateful we overcame the darkness. A year after the meltdown, local news revisited the story, airing a short, "Where Are They Now?" segment. They interviewed me on my front porch. I talked about how the sabotage nearly froze families, but also how the community banded together to help the most vulnerable. They briefly mentioned Karen's prison sentence, though the story's focus was on our collective recovery. The reporter concluded with, "Haverhill Park Estates stands as a testament that even the coldest acts can't extinguish holiday warmth." Viewers responded positively, praising the neighborhood's unity. Some asked if I'd keep decorating for years to come. "Absolutely," I replied. As long as my neighbors enjoy it and we respect each other's space, I'll keep the tradition alive. That same week, I received a letter from the state's power authority commending me for quickly coordinating with them during the crisis. It was more of a formality, but it felt nice that my brother's role and the timely communications had been recognized. Our synergy had sped up the restoration, saving countless households from extended suffering. Perhaps the most meaningful sign of closure was seeing how no one mentioned Karen's name with fear or resentment anymore. She was simply a cautionary footnote in our shared history. The kids who once cowered in candlelit gloom now laughed openly, excited for the next holiday season, unafraid that someone might sabotage their joy. Over 2 years have passed since that catastrophic night when Karen, fueled by malice against my Christmas lights, cut power to an entire suburb in the midst of a deadly freeze. The memories linger, but they no longer define us. Haverhill Park Estates emerged stronger, forging tighter bonds through the crisis. Ms. Delgado recovered and remains a treasured resident, often remarking how the community's caring spirit saved her life. Karen, meanwhile, serves her sentence. The final judgment included restitution to the utility company and families who suffered damages. That money went toward pipe repairs, medical bills, and more robust safety measures at the substation. A grotesque act turned into impetus for positive change, though we'd trade that any day if we could have avoided the trauma. As for me, I still decorate each holiday season, ensuring the lights bring a smile without overshadowing neighbors' comfort. The HOA is more supportive now, adopting guidelines that encourage festive displays while respecting quiet hours. In a sense, Karen's extreme reaction ironically clarified the difference between polite concerns and destructive obsession. Every December, as the first snow falls on Haverhill Park, I flip the switch on my twinkling arrangement. The reindeer silhouettes, the softly glowing Santa. Each element stands as a quiet testament to resilience. The same power lines that once went dead now light up the nights with gentle color. Neighbors wander by to admire the display, sipping hot cocoa, sharing laughter. We are reminded how precious warmth is, both literal heat and the warmth of kindness. On Christmas Eve each year, I host a small open house, offering cookies and a place to watch the synchronized lights. The conversation often touches on that dreadful sabotage, but only briefly. We prefer to celebrate the camaraderie that overcame it. If new residents ask, "Did that really happen, or is it just a rumor?" we show them news clippings. Yes, it happened, but we got through it together. In the end, the final glow of the holiday lights outshone one woman's attempt to steal the season. Karen's short-sighted fury never quenched our shared hope or the spark that lit up Haverhill Park's spirit. Today, we remain a neighborhood that celebrates the sparkle of the holidays with unwavering joy, no matter how cold the outside world or an embittered neighbor may become.